Dracula by Bram Stoker. Jonathan Harker's Journal. 3rd May, Bistritz. Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on 1st of May, arriving at Vienna early next morning. Should have arrived at 6:46, but train was an hour late. I find that this district is in the extreme east of the country, just on the borders of 3 states, Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina, in the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe. I was not able to light on any map or work giving the exact locality of the castle, but I found that Bistritz, the post town named by Count Dracula, is a fairly well-known place. Count Dracula had directed me to go to the Golden Krone Hotel, which I found to my great delight to be thoroughly old-fashioned, for of course I wanted to see all I could of the ways of the country. I was evidently expected, for when I got near the door, I faced a cheery-looking elderly woman in the usual peasant dress. When I came close, she bowed and said, "The Herr Englishman?" "Yes," I said, "Jonathan Harker." She smiled and gave me a letter. My friend, welcome to the Carpathians. I am anxiously expecting you. Sleep well tonight. At 3 tomorrow, the public coach will start for Bukovina. A place on it is kept for you. At the Borgo Pass, my carriage will await you and will bring you to me. I trust that your journey from London has been a happy one, and that you will enjoy your stay in my beautiful land. Your friend, Dracula. 4th of May. Just before I was leaving, the old lady came up to my room and said in a very hysterical way, "Must you go? Oh, young Herr, must you go?" When I told her that I must go at once, and that I was engaged on important business, she went down on her knees and implored me not to. It was all very ridiculous, but I didn't feel comfortable. I soon lost sight and recollection of ghostly fears in the beauty of the scene as we drove along. Before us lay a green, sloping land full of forests and woods, with here and there steep hills crowned with clumps of trees or with farmhouses. Beyond the swelling hills rose mighty slopes of forest up to the lofty steeps of the Carpathians themselves. When it grew dark, there seemed to be some excitement amongst the passengers, and they kept speaking to the driver as though urging him to further speed. He lashed the horses unmercifully with his long whip, and with wild cries of encouragement urged them on to further exertions. Then the mountains seemed to come nearer to us on each side, and to frown down upon us. We were entering the Borgo Pass. I was now myself looking out for the conveyance which was to take me to the Count, but there was no sign of a vehicle. The passengers drew back with a sigh of gladness which seemed to mock my own disappointment. I was already thinking what I had best do, when the horses began to neigh and snort and plunge wildly, so that the driver had to hold them up. Then, amongst a chorus of screams from the peasants and a universal crossing of themselves, a calèche with 4 horses drove up behind us, overtook us, and drew up beside the coach. I could see from the flash of our lamps as the rays fell on them that the horses were coal-black and splendid animals. They were driven by a tall man with a long brown beard and a great black hat, which seemed to hide his face from us. I could only see the gleam of a pair of very bright eyes, which seemed red in the lamplight. As he turned to us, he said to the driver, "You are early tonight, my friend." As he spoke, he smiled, and the lamplight fell on a hard-looking mouth with very red lips and sharp-looking teeth as white as ivory. Then I descended from the side of the coach as the caleche was close alongside, the driver helping me with a hand which caught my arm in a grip of steel. His strength must have been prodigious. Without a word, he shook his reins. The horses turned, and we swept into the darkness of the pass. I felt a little strangely and not a little frightened. I think, had there been any alternative, I should have taken it, instead of prosecuting that unknown night journey. Then the moon, sailing through the black clouds, appeared behind the jagged crest of a beetling, pine-clad rock, and by its light I saw around us a ring of wolves with white teeth and lolling red tongues, with long, sinewy limbs and shaggy hair. I called to the coachman and saw him stand in his seat. He swept his long arms as though brushing aside some impalpable obstacle. The wolves fell back, and back further still. Just then, a heavy cloud passed across the face of the moon, so that we were again in darkness. When I could see again, the wolves had disappeared. This was all so strange and uncanny that a dreadful fear came upon me, and I was afraid to speak or move. The time seemed interminable as we swept on our way, now in complete darkness. Suddenly, I became conscious of the fact that the driver was in the act of pulling up the horses in the courtyard of a vast, ruined castle, from whose tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed a jagged line against the moonlit sky. When the caleche stopped, the driver jumped down and held out his hand to assist me to alight. Again, I could not but notice his prodigious strength. The driver jumped again into his seat and shook the reins. The horses started forward, and trap and all disappeared down one of the dark openings. I stood in silence where I was, for I did not know what to do. Suddenly I heard a heavy step approaching behind the great door, and saw through the chinks the gleam of a coming light. Then there was the sound of rattling chains and the clanking of massive bolts drawn back. A key was turned with a loud grating noise of long disuse, and the great door swung back. Within stood a tall old man, clean-shaven, save for a long white moustache, and clad in black from head to foot, without a single speck of colour about him anywhere. He held in his hand an antique silver lamp, throwing long, quivering shadows as it flickered in the draught of the open door. The old man motioned me in with his right hand with a courtly gesture, saying in excellent English, but with a strange intonation, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely, and of your own will." He made no motion of stepping to meet me, but stood like a statue, as though his gesture of welcome had fixed him into stone. The instant, however, that I had stepped over the threshold, he moved impulsively forward, and holding out his hand, grasped mine with a strength which made me wince, an effect which was not lessened by the fact that it seemed as cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead than a living man. Again he said, "Welcome to my house. Come freely, go safely, and leave something of the happiness you bring." Count Dracula? He bowed in a courtly way as he replied, "I am Dracula, and I bid you welcome, Mr. Harker, to my house. Come in. The night air is chill, and you must need to eat and rest." As he was speaking, he put the lamp on a bracket on the wall, and stepping out, took my luggage. He had carried it in before I could forestall him. He insisted on carrying my luggage along the passage, and then up a great winding stair, and along another great passage on whose stone floor our steps rang heavily. Passing through this, he opened another door, and motioned me to enter. It was a welcome sight, for here was a great bedroom, well lighted, and warmed with another log fire, which sent a hollow roar up the wide chimney. The Count himself left my luggage inside and withdrew, saying, before he closed the door, "You will need, after your journey, to refresh yourself. I trust you will find all you wish. When you are ready, come into the other room, where you will find your supper prepared." The light and warmth and the Count's courteous welcome seemed to have dissipated all my doubts and fears. So making a hasty toilet, I went into the other room. I found supper already laid out. My host, who stood on one side of the great fireplace, leaning against the stonework, made a graceful wave of his hand to the table and said, "I pray you be seated and sup how you please. You will, I trust, excuse me that I do not join you, but I have dined already." The Count himself came forward and took off the cover of a dish, and I fell to at once on an excellent roast chicken. In time I had finished my supper, and by my host's desire had drawn up a chair by the fire and begun to smoke a cigar which he offered me, at the same time excusing himself that he did not smoke. I had now an opportunity of observing him, and found him of a very marked physiognomy. His face was a very strong aquiline, with high bridge of the thin nose and peculiarly arched nostrils, with lofty domed forehead, and hair growing scantily round the temples, but profusely elsewhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with bushy hair that seemed to curl in its own profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under the heavy moustache, was fixed and rather cruel-looking, with peculiarly sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, whose remarkable ruddiness showed astonishing vitality in a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and at the tops extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, and the cheeks firm, though thin. The general effect was one of extraordinary pallor. I noticed his hands as they lay on his knees in the firelight. Strange to say, there were hairs in the centre of the palm. The nails were long and fine, and cut to a sharp point. As the Count leaned over me and his hands touched me, I could not repress a shudder. It may have been that his breath was rank, but a horrible feeling of nausea came over me, which, do what I would, I could not conceal. The Count, evidently noticing it, drew back with a grim sort of smile. We were both silent for a while, and as I looked towards the window, I saw the first dim streak of the coming dawn. Then he rose and said, "But you must be tired. Your bedroom is all ready, and tomorrow you shall sleep as late as you will. I have to be away till the afternoon, so sleep well and dream well." 7th May. There are certainly odd deficiencies in the house, considering the extraordinary evidences of wealth which are around me. In none of the rooms is there a mirror. There is not even a toilette glass on my table, and I had to get the little shaving glass from my bag before I could either shave or brush my hair. I have not seen a servant anywhere, or heard a sound near the castle except the howling of wolves. In the library I found, to my great delight, a vast number of English books, whole shelves full of them, and bound volumes of magazines and newspapers. Whilst I was looking at the books, The door opened and the Count entered. He saluted me in a hearty way and hoped that I had had a good night's rest. Then he went on. "I am glad you found your way in here, for I am sure there is much that will interest you. These friends," and he laid his hand on some of the books, "have been good friends to me. And for some years past, ever since I had the idea of going to London, they have given me many, many hours of pleasure. Through them, I have come to know your great England, and to know her is to love her. I long to go through the crowded streets of your mighty London, to be in the midst of the whirl and rush of humanity, to share its life, its change, its death, and all that makes it what it is. Come," he said at last, "tell me of London, and of the house which you have procured for me." With an apology for my remissness, I went into my own room to get the papers from my bag. We went thoroughly into the business of the purchase of the estate at Purfleet. When I had told him the facts, and got his signature to the necessary papers, and had written a letter to my employer, Mr. Hawkins, he began to ask me how I had come across so suitable a place. I read to him the notes which I had made at the time, and which I inscribe here. The estate is called Carfax. The house is very large, and of all periods, back, I should say, to medieval times, for one part is of stone immensely thick, with only a few windows high up and heavily barred with iron. It looks like part of a keep, and is close to an old chapel or church. There are but few houses close at hand, one being a very large house, only recently formed into a private lunatic asylum. It is not, however, visible from the grounds. When I had finished, he said, "I'm glad that it is old and big. I myself am of an old family, and to live in a new house would kill me. A house cannot be made habitable in a day, and after all, how few days go to make up a century. I rejoice also that there is a chapel of old times. We Transylvanian nobles love not to think that our bones may be amongst the common dead. I seek not gaiety, nor mirth, nor the bright voluptuousness of much sunshine and sparkling waters which please the young and gay. I am no longer young, and my heart, through weary years of mourning over the dead, is not attuned to mirth. Moreover, the walls of my castle are broken, the shadows are many, and the wind breathes cold through the broken battlements and casements. I love the shade and the shadow, and would be alone with my thoughts when I may. 8th May. There is something so strange about this place and all in it that I cannot but feel uneasy. I wish I was safe out of it, or that I had never come. It may be that this strange night existence is telling on me, but would that that were all. I only slept a few hours when I went to bed, and feeling that I could not sleep any more, got up. I had hung my shaving glass by the window, and was just beginning to shave. Suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder, and heard the Count's voice saying to me, "Good morning." I started, for it amazed me that I had not seen him, since the reflection of the glass covered the whole room behind me. In starting, I had cut myself slightly, but did not notice it at the moment. Having answered the Count's salutation, I turned to the glass again to see how I had been mistaken. This time there could be no error, for the man was close to me, and I could see him over my shoulder, but there was no reflection of him in the mirror. The whole room behind me was displayed. but there was no sign of a man in it, except myself. But at that instant I saw that the cut had bled a little, and the blood was trickling over my chin. I laid down the razor, turning as I did so. When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with a sort of demoniac fury, and he suddenly made a grab at my throat. I drew away, and his hand touched the string of beads which held the crucifix. It made an instant change in him, for the fury passed so quickly that I could hardly believe that it was ever there. "Take care," he said. "Take care how you cut yourself. It is more dangerous than you think in this country." Then, seizing the shaving glass, he went on, "And this is the wretched thing that has done the mischief. It is a foul bauble of man's vanity. Away with it!" And opening the heavy window with one wrench of his terrible hand, he flung out the glass, which was shattered into 1,000 pieces on the stones of the courtyard far below. Then he withdrew without a word. After breakfast, I did a little exploring in the castle. I went out on the stairs and found a room looking towards the south. The view was magnificent. But I am not in heart to describe beauty, for when I had seen the view, I explored further. Doors, doors, doors everywhere, and all locked and bolted. In no place, save from the windows in the castle walls, is there an available exit. The castle is a veritable prison, and I am a prisoner. 9th May, midnight. I have had a long talk with the Count. I asked him a few questions on Transylvanian history, and he warmed up to the subject wonderfully, especially of battles. He spoke as if he'd been present at them all. "We, Dracula, have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who fought as the lion fights for lordship. Ah, young sir, the Dracula, their heart's blood, their brains, and their swords can boast a record that mushroom growths like the Habsburgs and the Romanovs can never reach. The warlike days are over. Blood is too precious a thing in these days of dishonorable peace, and the glories of the great races are as a tale that is told." It was by this time close on morning, and we went to bed. 16th May. God preserve my sanity, for to this I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past. Whilst I live on here, there is but one thing to hope for, that I may not go mad, if indeed I be not mad already. Last night I went to my room. After a little while, not hearing any sound, I came out and went up the stone stair to where I could look out towards the south. As I leaned from the window, my eye was caught by something moving a story below me. What I saw was the Count's head coming out from the window. I was at first interested and somewhat amused, but my feelings changed to repulsion and terror when I saw the whole man slowly emerge from the window and begin to crawl down the castle wall over that dreadful abyss, face down, with his cloak spreading out around him like great wings. What manner of man is this? Or what manner of creature is it in the semblance of man? I knew he had left the castle now, and thought to use the opportunity to explore more than I had dared to do as yet. I went back to the room, and taking a lamp, tried all the doors. They were all locked, as I had expected. At last, however, I found one door at the top of a stairway, which, though it seemed to be locked, gave a little under pressure. Evidently I was now in a wing of the castle occupied in bygone days, for the furniture had more air of comfort than any I had seen. After trying a little to school my nerves, I found a soft quietude come over me. I sat at a little oak table where in old times possibly some fair lady sat to pen her ill-spelt love letter, and writing in my diary in shorthand all that has happened since I closed it last. When I had written in my diary, and had fortunately replaced the book and pen in my pocket, the sense of sleep was upon me. I suppose I must have fallen asleep, but I fear all that followed was startlingly real. I was not alone. The room was the same, unchanged in any way since I came into it. I could see along the floor in the brilliant moonlight my own footsteps marked where I had disturbed the long accumulation of dust. In the moonlight opposite me were 3 young women, ladies by their dress and manner. I thought at the time that I must be dreaming when I saw them, for though the moonlight was behind them, they threw no shadow on the floor. They came close to me and looked at me for some time and then whispered together. 2 were dark and had high aquiline noses like the Count, and great dark piercing eyes that seemed to be almost red when contrasted with the pale yellow moon. The other was fair as can be, with great wavy masses of golden hair and eyes like pale sapphires. I seemed somehow to know her face, and to know it in connection with some dreamy fear, but I could not recollect at the moment how or where. All 3 had brilliant white teeth that shone like pearls against the ruby of their voluptuous lips. There was something about them that made me uneasy, some longing, and at the same time some deadly fear. I felt in my heart a wicked, burning desire that they would kiss me with those red lips. It is not good to note this down, lest some day it should meet Mina's eyes and cause her pain, but it is the truth. They whispered together, and then they all 3 laughed. Such a silvery musical laugh, but as hard as though the sound never could have come through the softness of human lips. It was like the intolerable tingling sweetness of water glasses when played on by a cunning hand. The fair girl shook her head coquettishly, and the other 2 urged her on. One said, "Go on. You are first, and we shall follow. Yours is the right to begin." The other added, "He is young and strong. There are kisses for us all." I lay quiet, looking out under my eyelashes in an agony of delightful anticipation. The fair girl advanced and bent over me till I could feel the movement of her breath upon me. Sweet it was in one sense, honey sweet, and sent the same tingling through the nerves as her voice, but with a bitter underlying sweet, a bitter offensiveness as one smells in blood. I was afraid to raise my eyelids, but looked out and saw perfectly under the lashes. The fair girl went on her knees and bent over me, fairly gloating. There was a deliberate voluptuousness which was both thrilling and repulsive, and as she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see in the moonlight the moisture shining on the scarlet lips and on the red tongue as it lapped the white, sharp teeth. Lower and lower went her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin and seemed about to fasten on my throat. Then she paused, and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue as it licked her teeth and lips, and could feel the hot breath on my neck. Then the skin of my throat began to tingle as one's flesh does when the hand that has tickled it approaches nearer, nearer. I could feel the soft, shivering touch of the lips on the supersensitive skin of my throat, and the hard dents of two sharp teeth just touching and pausing there. I closed my eyes in a languorous ecstasy and waited with beating heart. But at that instant, another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. I was conscious of the presence of the Count, and of his being as if lapped in a storm of fury. As my eyes opened involuntarily, I saw his strong hand grasp the slender neck of the fair woman, and with giant's power draw it back, the blue eyes transformed with fury, the white teeth champing with rage, and the fair cheeks blazing red with passion. But the Count! Never did I imagine such wrath and fury, even in the demons of the pit. His eyes were positively blazing. The red light in them was lurid, as if the flames of hell fire blazed behind them. His face was deathly pale, and the lines of it were hard like drawn wires. The thick eyebrows that met over the nose now seemed like a heaving bar of white-hot metal. With a fierce sweep of his arm, he hurled the woman from him, and then motioned to the others as though he were beating them back. It was the same imperious gesture that I had seen used to the wolves. In a voice which, though low and almost a whisper, seemed to cut through the air and then ring around the room, he exclaimed, "How dare you touch him, any of you? How dare you cast eyes on him when I had forbidden it? Back, I tell you all. This man belongs to me. I promise you that when I am done with him, you shall kiss him at your will. Now go, go. I must awaken him, for there is work to be done." "Are we to have nothing tonight?" said one of them with a low laugh, as she pointed to the bag which he had thrown upon the floor, and which moved as though there were some living thing within it. For answer, he nodded his head. One of the women jumped forward and opened it. If my ears did not deceive me, there was a gasp and a low wail as of a half-smothered child. The women closed round, whilst I was aghast with horror. But as I looked, they disappeared, and with them the dreadful bag. There was no door near them, and they could not have passed me without my noticing. They simply seemed to fade into the rays of the moonlight and pass out through the window, for I could see outside the dim, shadowy forms for a moment before they entirely faded away. Then the horror overcame me, and I sank down unconscious. 19th May. I am surely in the toils. Last night the Count asked me in the suavest tones to write 3 letters, one saying that my work here was nearly done and that I should start for home within a few days, another that I was starting on the next morning from the time of the letter, and the third that I had left the castle and arrived at Bistritz. I asked him what dates I should put on the letters. He calculated a minute and then said, "The first should be June 12, the second June 19, and the third June 29. I know now the span of my life. God help me. 17th June. This morning, as I was sitting on the edge of my bed, cudgelling my brains, I heard without a cracking of whips and pounding and scraping of horses' feet up the rocky path beyond the courtyard. With joy I hurried to the window and saw drive into the yard 2 great lighter wagons, each drawn by 8 sturdy horses, and at the head of each pair a Slovak with his wide hat, great nail-studded belt, dirty sheepskin, and high boots. But no effort of mine, no piteous cry or agonized entreaty would make them even look at me. They resolutely turned away. The lighter wagons contained great square boxes with handles of thick rope. They were evidently empty by the ease with which the Slovaks handled them, and by their resonance as they were roughly moved. 21st June, before morning. Last night the Count left me early and locked himself into his own room. Suddenly I heard a sound in the courtyard without, the agonized cry of a woman. "Monster, give me my child!" She threw herself on her knees and, raising up her hands, cried the same words in tones which wrung my heart. Then she tore her hair and beat her breast and abandoned herself to all the violences of extravagant emotion. Finally, she threw herself forward, and although I could not see her, I could hear the beating of her naked hands against the door. Somewhere, high overhead, probably on the tower, I heard the voice of the Count calling in his harsh metallic whisper. His call seemed to be answered from far and wide by the howling of wolves. Before many minutes had passed, a pack of them poured like a pent-up dam when liberated through the wide entrance into the courtyard. There was no cry from the woman, and the howling of the wolves was but short. Before long, they streamed away singly, licking their lips. I could not pity her, for I knew now what had become of her child, and she was better dead. What shall I do? What can I do? How can I escape from this dreadful thrall of night and gloom and fear? 29th June. Today is the date of my last letter, the last of that fatal series which is to blot out the very traces of my existence from the earth. I went, whilst my courage was fresh, straight to the window on the south side, and at once got outside on the narrow ledge of stone which runs round the building on this side. I knew pretty well the direction and distance of the Count's window, and made for it as well as I could, till I found myself standing on the window-sill and trying to raise up the sash. I was filled with agitation, however, when I bent down and slid feet foremost in through the window. The room was empty. At one corner was a heavy door. I tried it. It was open, and led through a stone passage to a circular stairway which went steeply down. At the bottom there was a dark tunnel-like passage through which came a deathly, sickly odour, the odour of old earth newly turned. As I went through the passage, the smell grew closer and heavier. At last I pulled open a heavy door which stood ajar, and found myself in an old ruined chapel which had evidently been used as a graveyard. The ground had recently been dug over, and the earth placed in great wooden boxes, manifestly those which had been brought by the Slovaks. There, in one of the great boxes, on a pile of newly dug earth, lay the Count. He was either dead or asleep. I could not say which, for the eyes were open and stony, but without the glassiness of death. But there was no sign of movement, no pulse, no breath, no beating of the heart. He looked as if his youth had been half renewed, for the white hair and moustache were changed to dark iron grey. The cheeks were fuller, and the white skin seemed ruby red underneath. The mouth was redder than ever, for on the lips were gouts of fresh blood, which trickled from the corners of the mouth and ran over the chin and neck. Even the deep burning eyes seemed set amongst swollen flesh, for the lids and pouches underneath were bloated. It seemed as if the whole awful creature were simply gorged with blood. He lay like a filthy leech, exhausted with his repletion. A terrible desire came upon me to rid the world of such a monster. There was no lethal weapon at hand, but I seized a shovel which the workmen had been using to fill the cases, and lifting it high, struck with the edge downward at the hateful face. But as I did so, the head turned, and the eyes fell full upon me, with all their blaze of basilisk horror. The sight seemed to paralyze me, and the shovel turned in my hand and glanced from the face, merely making a deep gash above the forehead. The shovel fell from my hand across the box, and as I pulled it away, the flange of the blade caught the edge of the lid, which fell over again and hid the horrid thing from my sight. The last glimpse I had was of the bloated face, blood-stained and fixed with a grin of malice which would have held its own in the nethermost hell. I thought and thought what should be my next move, but my brain seemed on fire. I heard in the distance a gypsy song, sung by merry voices coming closer, and through their song the rolling of heavy wheels and the cracking of whips. The Slovaks were coming. I ran from the place and gained the Count's room. I was a prisoner, and the net of doom was closing round me more closely. As I write, there is in the passage below a sound of many tramping feet, and the crash of weights being set down heavily, doubtless the boxes with their freight of earth. There is a sound of hammering. It is the box being nailed down. Now I can hear in the courtyard and down the rocky way the roll of heavy wheels, the crack of whips, and the chorus of the gypsies as they pass into the distance. I'm alone in the castle with those awful women. I shall not remain alone with them. I shall try to scale the castle wall, farther than I have yet attempted. I may find a way from this dreadful place, and then away for home, away to the quickest and nearest train, away from this cursed spot, from this cursed land, where the devil and his children still walk with earthly feet. At least God's mercy is better than that of these monsters, and the precipice is steep and high. At its foot a man may sleep as a man.